I just want to introduce myself, Paul Dooley. I'm the head of marketing transformation at AWS. I work at kind of the intersection of both Amazon and AWS, and how we're kind of driving innovation and outcomes for marketers across both AWS and AWS advertising and Amazon advertising and Amazon retail. So really looking forward to our discussion, Kate. I know we talked about the future of media and innovation, and I think you're at the intersection of that at PepsiCo. So I thought we'd start out just to do a short introduction, give it a little bit of context and background for who you are and your role at PepsiCo, and before we start diving in on the future of media.
Sorry, having some technical difficulties right now, but I think
No
I'm figuring
worries.
it out.
So this is all very casual.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me, Paul. I'm really happy to be able to talk with you today and tell you a little bit about what my history is and what my team does at PepsiCo. And so for now, I've been in the media landscape for over 20 years, spending over almost 10, just about 10 years on the agency side across a variety of Group M agencies, across almost every vertical during that tenure. But most of the time I spent on the telco and pharma space. In 2010, I did make the jump to the client side of the desk when I joined Pepsi. And I spent about 9 years in our North American beverages business, where I had the privilege of working on every single one of our beverages across our portfolio, with the exception of Gatorade, which is run out of a different business unit. But that all changed about 3 years ago, when I did have the opportunity to now work on Gatorade across, as well as every brand that's in our portfolio. Because as you mentioned, I am our global head of media innovation and partnership development. We sit in a team called our Demand Accelerator Group. And I'm in a subset of that team called the Media and Data Team. And it's been an amazing journey over these past 3 years building this team up.
Yeah, that's great. I love the marketers that have made that transition, working on the agency side, and then working on the client side, and then across such a global brand portfolio. It's a very unique skill set. So I think you are well positioned to have some great insights around the future of media. So let's talk a little bit. I know you and I chatted about that particular team that you're leading around media innovation and partnerships. Talk a little bit about the mission that you have and the goals at PepsiCo for the team that you lead.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I like to say we are a small but mighty team. And when I started this team about 3 years ago, it was just myself for the first almost 9 months, I believe. But now I'm so grateful. We've got a team up to 4. And the genesis of the creation of this team was truly because of the recognition that our consumers are changing, from the way they interact with media to how they purchase our products and how they want brands to connect with them. And so at the same time, the media landscape has transformed significantly, especially over these past few years through COVID. And there's now endless ways to consume content. New data-driven tech platforms arise daily and are continually evolving at this heightened pace. And this level of transformation really does require a dedicated digital marketing effort. And here at PepsiCo, we're so laser focused on ensuring that we're at the forefront of identifying what's new, what's next, and what will be the best way for us to connect with our consumers.
Yeah, I think it's a great strategy in terms of, you've got to be at the forefront. You have to fish where the fish are, and they constantly are moving to new platforms and new experiences, and then understanding how you're engaging with them across those new media landscape. So thinking about some of those challenges that you have in addressing innovation across media and with the startup community that you work with, can you talk a little bit about what are some of those areas of focus? What are areas of challenge that you're trying to address with the startup community?
Yeah, I think each year, I think it changes slightly, but our goal is identifying any sort of new AI or ML or tech-driven solutions. And like I said, it's changed year over year. Our first year was really focused in the creative excellence space. So we had pilots running against creative development and creative intelligence. From then, the second year that we ran the program, we extended our efforts into areas of personalization at scale and gaming and sports marketing, with this continued emphasis of creative excellence, because we do know it's a massive priority across the organization. This past year, in the 2021 class of our program, our efforts were really focused on two areas, on competitive intelligence and then performance marketing. And so we found a few pilots that are still currently in progress right now that we're continuing to run against those efforts.
Yeah, that's great. I think having I'm sure there's no lack of use cases or new technology or capabilities that you're constantly scanning the market for. But I like the fact that you prioritize these and use those as areas of focus. Next, you've actually in the process of doing that, I know you evaluated over 600 startups as part of that process of vetting and finding solutions to address those challenges, like competitive intelligence or driving performance marketing, or the AI and ML use to better tag or target creative. Can you talk a little bit how you've been able to scale? Because you've obviously got a lot of startups that you're working with. You got to filter through those, execute some rapid pilots and even POCs. And obviously that takes a lot of prioritization so that you pick the right ones.
Yeah, so through the past 3 years, we've established a really systematic process, and that we've iterated against over the past few years as we've gone through it and really figured out what works well. And I feel like we're a super well-oiled machine at this point. And it all starts by identifying what the business challenge is that we're trying to address. From there, we establish a very clear brief that is shared with our VC network. And part of the beauty of our partnership with the Labs team is that the Labs team have a deep expertise in the tech venturing space and a really strong network of support for our efforts. And so, as you mentioned, we've evaluated over 600 startups and easily over 600 over the past 3 years. But what we do is we reduce that list down to a very small curated list that we bring in for an immersion or a pitch session. The past few years, it's covered a couple of days time where we bring in some of our key brand stakeholders or cross-functional stakeholders to listen to these pitch sessions. From there, as a collective, we determine, what are the few that we do think have a real strong opportunity to solve the problems we're working towards. And so we've prioritized this like fewer, bigger, better approach in how we're doing everything. So that we don't get over our skis and have too many issues to be able to actually execute and find those successes. So we run these rapid pilots or proof of concepts. Ideally, they're really short in nature so that we can get some quick results and really move, test and learn. If we're going to fail, we want to fail fast so that we can move on to the next issue. And so it's typically anywhere from like a 6 to 12 week pilot. But always long enough that we can get some level of measurable results, because we're always really critical about ensuring we have core KPIs that we're addressing against. And from there, we have a very objective assessment process that puts a lot of rigor behind how we're now analyzing all of these programs, so that anybody that can see kind of our standardized assessment at the end can say, okay, this makes sense. We understand why we're choosing to go or no go on these partners. And then hopefully, if it's deemed successful, which hopefully it is, we then work across the organization to scale those winning solutions. And so my team alone has executed over 20 marketing pilots through the past 3 years. And we're also in the process of scaling 8 of those, which is a really, really fantastic feat. And I think it's a testament to the rigor that we put into the assessment process, that we find the right solutions to address our problems, and we help champion and mentor those internally. But when you think about the fact that the typical startup success rate is usually like 1 out of 10 makes it, the fact that we've got, we're hitting, well above 30%. I think, we're hitting well above the average, which is great, and super impressed with our results. And I think it's also become a testament to the recognition that we're getting internally of the go-to for those new solutions, which is very exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, I'd say like 8 out of 20. That's a huge hit rate. And also, I'm sure it stretches your team in terms of how do you support scaling 8 of those, at the same time, or in sequence. So you think about those focus areas of innovation when you prioritize those pilots. You think, what are some of the criteria that you use? Is it like, think big, start small? Is it, trying to criteria around the bottom line or ability to scale globally or within North America? Be curious about some of the criteria that you use to evaluate the pilots and the startups that you're selecting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And last year, we actually stood up a innovation council across the organization on a global scale. And what we found is that we really wanted to ensure that we were capturing all of the challenges and insights from the various constituents across the globe and ensuring that we were finding these common challenges that we really could make sure we were choosing the few to really make the most value for the organization. And so we leverage this forum to get that alignment, help us prioritize really where to focus our efforts, and align, on what is the one that we want to put our bets against. I mentioned, over the past few years, we've looked at creative excellence, personalization at scale, gaming, sports marketing. Those were all areas that were identified and highlighted by our leaders across the organization that they needed some support, additional support in, and saw opportunity for in the future. And so, when we think about what we're looking at this year, we've actually pulled up our timeline, our typical timeline, because of the excitement and urgency around the issue that we're excited to kick off this year, which is all around the metaverse. And so we're really focused and leaning in now to just try and see how we can get some quick understanding of really what PepsiCo's approach is. But you mentioned earlier, that there's a lot that we're trying to scale, and it takes a lot of time to be able to develop those. And so we have made this conscious effort of fewer, bigger, better to ensure that while we're scaling the pilots from the past couple of years until they're at a point where we can just hand off and say, no, these are embedded solutions into our teams. They still need a little bit of handholding and a little bit of support as they're trying to build up these new capabilities. And so we want to ensure that we're focused on that. We have the bandwidth to continue to run the pilots that are still in progress, but that we're also looking future forward to ensure that we're finding those new solutions for tomorrow. And so we've split our time pretty accordingly to ensure that, our remit is split against scaling, executing, but then also that future scouting. And so I think that's the way that we've set ourselves up to ensure that we have that continued success that we've so far been able to achieve.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, can you talk maybe just a bit about that council in terms of the representation? Is it like different geos, different brands, different marketing functions, IT? Is it kind of cross-functional? I'd be curious.
It is. Yeah, it covers, we have all of so we refer to our different market regions as our sectors. And so we do have a key lead from each of those sectors. We have we have key cross-functional partners that include everybody from our shopper marketing teams to our IT teams. We have often we'll bring in some legal representation. The goal really here is to have a fully fledged out forum of people that can help ensure that we're taking everybody along in the process and getting the right questions, getting the right insights, and getting the right support as we do find these solutions that we want to scale, so that it's not new news, that it's a much easier transition point.
Sure. And when you're scaling, are you also bringing in other partners, like strategic partners or agency partners? Having spent time at the agency side, as you have, agencies are never at a loss for creative ideas and even technology ideas. So I was curious if they get involved, and if so, when during the process.
Yeah, actually, OMD is our agency of record for the majority of our global work, and they have been a phenomenal partner for us. and building out this program for the digital marketing efforts. And so it's our PepsiCo Labs team, our media innovation and partnership development team, and then we've got a core group from our global OMD team who helps us bring these efforts, because there is also a lot of change management that's required on the agency side of things. And so we found that between the Innovation Council and then on the OMD side of things, having them involved and having them help champion these efforts is really critical to the future success.
Yeah, from my experience, I found that engaging the brands and their agencies early and often is a good recipe for success
I would
if you want them to
expect.
adopt whatever innovation you're planning. From
Definitely agree with it.
experience. Yeah. We talked a little bit about, how you're scaling and how you're prioritizing. And then I guess kind of overall, when you start making these kind of significant investments in time and, human capital in this kind of program, you must have some KPIs in mind that you're using to kind of judge the overall success of the program. I mean, you have great success rate, you've got great participation internally, but kind of how does that manifest itself in maybe a KPI or a goal that's moving the needle for you?
Yeah, I would say ideally for any CPG, our ultimate goal is driving incremental sales and incremental positive ROI. But with some of these super nascent platforms that we're typically working with, often we can't get that level of granularity from a measurement perspective. So we do tend to have to find alternative measures, and they often will end up being more brand engagement related or health measures, things like that. But it also depends on what the terrain is that we're focused on. So,
Sure.
something like the creative intelligence perspective, it's really focused for that. We were really looking for ways to provide more rapid assessments of our digital creative that was truly actionable and accurate. And so this leads to increased effectiveness scores across our entire global portfolio, and we're scaling those globally. So like those are the types of measures that in the longer term do have direct correlation to ROI, but it was something different that we were measuring in that. And then, similarly for competitive intelligence, the programs that we're running right now, it really is fully focused on the accuracy of the data that we're seeing in comparison to what we know is out there. And because we know historically that's been challenged in some of the syndicated research. And so looking for new solutions that can help us there, but also be more accurate, but also more timely. And so, looking to reduce the lag in some of these reports. As we think about the metaverse space, it's a huge question that we're still trying to figure out. We don't know exactly
Yeah,
what
what
we're
does
going to be able
success
to
look like?
measure.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
I
I know
think
we
just
have some
testing and
ideas.
learning.
Just test and learn. I think it's really at this point, it's just, just get in there, start playing around, really start experimenting and seeing what can be done. And I think, our KPIs will definitely evolve as the space evolves and as it becomes, more established.
Yeah, it sounds like, obviously you have you have to be flexible in terms of the KPIs that matter depending on the focus area that you're working in with that particular partner
Yeah.
and what success looks like. Everything from brand love to, brand affinity to maybe some lower funnel KPIs that you use around competitive intelligence. Maybe it's price, maybe it's creative sentiment. So it sounds like you've got a fairly flexible framework.
Yes, we do. I think flexibility is always key in any sort of innovation play.
Yeah. I think that the looking forward, and we talked about some of the new areas of innovation that are on your radar. I saw something kind of interesting. We looked at just the Super Bowl because I was out in LA for the Brand Innovator event there, talking to the CMO of the NFL, and I noticed that the streaming viewership is up doubled this year over last year for Super Bowl. So it's just like one example of the shift in to online.
Yeah.
So if you think about these areas of focus that might be on your radar and understanding where the Gen Z is headed, think about how do you think about those areas of media and innovation that you want to invest in, maybe 2 to 3 years out.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that, we are fully engulfed in our exploration of all things metaverse right now. I think that It's such an exciting and new space, and it's evolving daily, probably even more daily. I mean, there every morning I wake up to a whole slew of new articles that I'm trying to inform myself on. And there's so many different opinions in this space too, which is really exciting. And we see the naysayers to it, that it's all hype and it's going to be a fad and it's going to blow up, to those that are so bullish and all in, and like that
They
it's the
drank the
next
Kool-Aid.
$1 trillion. They've drank the Kool-Aid and they say it's the next $1 trillion space to be, so we've got to be there. And so that's really fascinating to explore and try and see that spectrum of everything. And it's so funny, simply just trying to get everybody to align on just a definition of what the metaverse is right now is also, it opens up debates that I've had, hour-long debates with several people often this week alone about trying to figure that out. But I love that PepsiCo sees that it's important for us to have a POV on this, and for us to understand like what our right to play is in this place, and how PepsiCo's brands can potentially come alive in the future. And so we already have a number of SLAM teams that we've established to help us work through these areas, everything from the crypto and blockchain space, to NFTs, to experiences, to what the future of work looks like in the metaverse from a metaverse perspective. And because there's so much buzz and interest in this space, we're looking to complete our initial immersion by the summer, which we're hoping to kick off with the labs program again, our pilots probably earlier than we typically do. So typically we've been on a pretty consistent calendar basis where we start our immersion in the May-June timeframe, and then we start executing our pilots in Q4. We're now pulling that up because there's such an enormous amount of interest of us figuring this out sooner than later, and not being left
I
behind.
think the velocity of change. I mean, look at Nike just bought Artifact.
Yeah.
The big brands are going to be in the space, and they certainly need partners to be there.
They certainly do.
So obviously that's a lot of space to cover. Metaverse is such a broad topic, and you've got many different stakeholders, and you got many different brands, but and how the brands want to play in that space. And are you thinking about like an overall kind of framework and where you want to maybe invest in some innovation versus trying to, every brand may innovate at their own pace, but I guess it's kind of like experimenting and then learning from that, and then taking those learnings and sharing it with the rest of your brands. Is that how you think about like the adoption curve for some of these new capabilities like the metaverse? Maybe you'll dabble in NFTs with one particular brand, or maybe live events in a metaverse with music, or live events like Super Bowl, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that is our goal, is to really help build the playbook that PepsiCo can use to make it a much more seamless, frictionless experience. We know that we have started to dabble in this space across a number of our different brands, and I think our brands, when you look at what Pepsi is all about, what Mountain Dew is all about, what Cheetos or Doritos, we really sit at the center of pop culture. And you mentioned music and concerts and Super Bowl. I mean, there's so much opportunity for us as we think about how we can engage in the space. So I do think that we're trying to help, as the lead in the media innovation space, to help identify what those roadblocks or challenges could be over the next couple of years, so that it does make it that frictionless, seamless process that we were just driving and setting up our brand teams for the most success in the future. Because we know there's a lot of challenges out there so far that we're still uncovering, and there will be more to uncover. And so, our goal is just to really help and assist in that process.
Yeah, and I think it's, I think if you think about, sports marketing, there's a whole kind of sports marketing function that's focused on Olympics and World Cup and, Super Bowl and, NASCAR, et cetera. And I imagine those are the activations you do. And then in the metaverse, there'll be activations that you'll do in the metaverse if that's where the consumers are. And it may be through music, it may be through sporting events, maybe through gaming. So it seems like it's a similar kind of channel of activation than you're already accustomed to. It's just a new technology. But things like AR and VR, would that also be in your kind of purview for the metaverse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are exploring it all. I've got my Oculus right here that I've been trying to immerse myself in and play around in, because I do think, the true metaverse will be those really deep, immersive experiences that, take you away from the physical world into this real amazing digital experience that we haven't really been able to figure out yet. I don't know that we're going to get to that Ready Player One Oasis type of platform anytime in the near future, but I think it's so exciting to see what these new technologies across all of the extended reality type of hardware sets can bring.
Well, that's great. That's exciting. When we talked about those examples of some of the things that you scaled, maybe you could give an example of like a picture of success from an innovation project that you've executed that was a successful pilot and then you scaled, and maybe just a couple of examples.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I guess one that we've been scaling truly globally at this point is one of the creative insights platforms that we partnered with, and CreativeX is the name of the platform. They leverage AI smart tagging to predict the success of digital media assets in the media landscape or digital channels. And we are truly scaling this across every single brand and every single market across the organization. But because what was recognized is that while we have a ton of rigor that is put behind our TV testing and video asset testing, the same level of rigor wasn't always being executed against our digital assets, just from a timeliness perspective, or just it was deprioritized, or it was just a lift and shift of our TV executions. But we know that to ensure that you have the best asset to drive the greatest sales, you really do need to hit just those brilliant basics. And that was oftentimes being missed. And so this platform helps us in a real-time fashion audit all of our assets, identify where there's room for optimization, allows us to optimize them really quickly so that we can put it back through and not publish anything unless we do feel like it is 100% excellence, that there is no room for improvement against those brilliant basics, which in turn drives greater ROI, because we know that the higher the creative excellence score is, the higher our sales, our ROI output will be. And so it's been amazing to see the markets that we've been able to onboard so far and really lean in, the growth that we've seen in their excellency scores across the past year. So it's really phenomenal to see this technology be adopted and really make an impact on our business.
No, that's great. I think the amount of investment you do in the creative assets you generate on a annual basis across all your brands and across all your geos must be a huge digital asset management challenge, let alone understanding and predicting the success of using those production ready assets for your different marketing campaigns.
You are correct.
So that's a huge challenge, and I'm sure there's huge ROI in that.
Yes. Yeah. And
I guess it also could inform future creative, not just existing creative.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the step one is really just doing those basic audits of the brilliant basics. There's definitely additional use cases as we onboard more of our platforms. So we're really excited about that as well.
Well, that sounds like a great success, and looks like an area that a smaller startup could really help move the needle around.
Yeah.
Great. So we talk about, you have to partner across lots of teams and stakeholders internally, especially when you're working globally. And then you even, you talked about the council, the Innovation Council, which is represents a lot of different stakeholders as well. Yeah. But I suspect that in order to be successful in terms of scaling, you've definitely got to have alignment with IT and the labs and the various agencies you work with, and even maybe strategic partners that might be important in order for you to scale these solutions. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you're getting that alignment and how you're collaborating across the org to really be successful.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Innovation Council. I think they are really a core constituent in helping us scale across the organization. And they are comprised of across, a number of different disciplines, which helps us. And bringing them along in the process, I think it's a core tenet of doing things the PepsiCo way, but also really does help make things work. And so the ethos of this council is truly to champion and support the scaling of what we've deemed successful. And so when we find those new use cases, to scale them, we have our brands or markets run additional pilots. So, it's never just a one and done. Like, we want to keep testing and making sure that, we see the continued success. But when we see those continued successes, I think it's always so helpful to hear your colleagues share those similar results. And so we ask these teams to then provide everybody with a share out of what's worked and where the challenges might be. And so it truly helps understand the new capabilities, but also drive the awareness of those new capabilities. And so I think that's, a critical part. Another area where I do think is pretty critical is when you think about a top-down approach. So, we've realized how challenging through this process change management is. And especially when you're thinking about an organization as massive as PepsiCo, trying to drive change management across a global scale is a feat that I don't wish on many. But we're learning as we go. And I can definitely say that having our senior leadership, especially the C-suite support to help push down some of these initiatives from the top down, it makes a significant impact in driving adoption.
Yeah, I think anytime you have a global program and you try to get local market adoption, it can be a bit of a challenge, especially if they have their own funding, their own agencies, their own technology potentially. So governance and alignment becomes super important for any global program.
Yeah.
So it's great to be inclusive and just include them in the decision making, so they become part of the initiative rather than being dictated to.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is the next question I had, was really around, obviously you're working with startups, you're investing time and human capital and the equity of PepsiCo with them to be successful. But how do you think about, like, maybe you should acquire a technology, or maybe you want to partner with a larger strategic partner, or maybe, like, let's just say, for example, Nike bought Artifact so that they could get into the NFT space and be able to manage that themselves as an internal capability. Maybe you buy an AI and ML company like MasterCard bought Dynamic Yield because they wanted to increase personalization at scale. So I was curious, like, if it's not your team, is that something that you have, like a venture capital investment fund where you might fund these kind of innovation and do acquisitions?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And our PepsiCo Labs team does serve as our tech venturing team. But I would say that our priority is typically more focused on the marketing aspect of things and the mentorship aspect of the partnership. But that being said, if we do determine that there's a strategic advantage for us investing in a startup, by getting in from an equity perspective, then that's definitely on the table. And we have gone down that road. There are a couple of partners that, not specifically in the marketing side, but we do run these programs on supply chain. We run it on our HR, we run it on sustainability sides as well. And we have invested in those companies, but we are always on the lookout of, does it make sense? Should we really invest in this? Is there a better advantage for us to have that? And so it's on the table, but I would say it's typically the exception versus the norm.
Yeah. And I imagine you can also include partnership options rather than, equity investments, where you're partnering and, in your case, mentoring and working with the startups, and eventually they grow up and they get bought.
Yes.
So I guess we're just about at time, but we got about 5 minutes. So I've got a couple of more questions here. One was on the local market adoption. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. But how do you think about that? Like, I think that doing global solutions can be challenging sometimes. And sometimes the local markets have some great ideas, and maybe things come out of a local market that you might want to replicate elsewhere. And so how do you think about them participating in the success of a global program like yours?
we're always looking for good ideas or for good opportunities. And I think part of my team sitting at the center of the organization, it is about identifying what's working in other regions and bringing those and sharing those insights across the organization. So I think it's a huge benefit. I think we don't want to say that we're the only ones that can do innovation work. That shouldn't be the case. We do have a great process that we know has worked and that we can help streamline and that we can help get those scaled opportunities. But if we see that a market is doing something that really is fantastic that we think we could replicate or scale, that's definitely on the table. And it's part of the reason that we've built this innovation council from a global perspective, is so that we can get those insights, we can bring those people in, we can find those new solutions that we might not have been aware of.
That's awesome. Diversity and inclusion at its best. So you have key partners that you kind of work with. So I think about innovation. I also think about, well, I work for Amazon and AWS. I think we're a fairly innovative company, but I think there's plenty of others out that are out there. So how do you think about, working across those strategic partners that you think are really critical to innovation? I know maybe go beyond your group into the labs group, but I'm curious about which of those partnerships are kind of on your radar. I'm assuming the usual suspects plus the emerging platforms.
Yeah, so I know we spent most of the time talking about my team's focus with the PepsiCo Labs program, but the other side of where my team's remit sits is leading the global digital JVPs across the organization. And so we are a big organization. We spend a lot of money with a lot of the bigger players that you're all aware of the Metas and the Googles and Snaps and TikToks and Twitters and Pinterest and Spotify and whatnot. And so my team helps lead those global partnerships to ensure that we're continuing to unlock value, that we're finding these new solutions, and bringing more out of the partnership than just the transactional relationship. And so we look to drive innovation in several ways, and with them as well. We have a really strategic learning agenda that we always set up to ensure that we're hitting against these markers. We ensure that we have a number of alphas and betas as a part of our programming throughout the year. But I think another beauty of the PepsiCo Labs program is that we're able to take these startups and the relationships that we're building, and if we see that there's opportunity to make 1 + 1 = 6 by partnering them with one of these more grown-up type of companies, we are always looking for those opportunities too, where it drives incremental value for us, it drives incremental value for the startup and for our partner, where we see these new solutions that they can help lift and really help amplify whatever efforts that we're doing. And so I think that's something that I love to see, a benefit that isn't just about buying equity into a startup, but it's really providing that thought leadership and that access and connections to these bigger relationships that I think PepsiCo is one of the few companies that can help really do at the volume that we can do.
Yeah, do that at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really encouraging. I think you're really doing some amazing work and trying to drive innovation across the globe, across such a large brand portfolio and group of stakeholders, and the success you've had with your pilots. Kudos to you and your team, and I very admire the work that you've done. And this, as things evolve in the metaverse, I want to touch back with you and maybe share some key learnings in a future brand innovation, maybe metaverse summit.
Love that.
So we got an idea for David and the Brand Innovators team. We got 2 people that'll sign up for that.
Exactly.
Well, great. I think we're just about time. I think we do have a few, maybe we have some questions in the chat. We might have time for a question here.
Yeah, I see a question about first-party data. What I can say on, we are more than doubling down on our first-party data acquisition as we move forward. We do recognize the challenges that we're going to face as an organization, and we've been on a journey of building out our own audience databases over the past few years. that we refer to as our CDNA. It's our consumer DNA, and it's comprised of over 100 million U.S. households. We're expanding this globally, and to ensure that we still have that robust data set and can grow with that, we're continuing to look to build those efforts as we progress. So it's definitely a massive priority of PepsiCo to continue to build up our own internal first-party data sets.
I will just ditto that with all the CPGs we work with. First party data is a huge area of focus.
Yes, absolutely.
So thanks, Kate, so much. And I think since I'm the MC, I'm going to kind of transition over to our next panel, but thank you so much.